next keynote session, we're honored to introduce Dr. Chuck Mattera, retired chair and CEO of Coherent Corporation. In that position, Dr. Mattera transformed an optics materials technology pioneer into a leading global photonics business innovator, today spanning 5 continents with more than 26,000 people. Along the way, the company's annual revenue grew to more than $5 billion. When he retired from Coherent in June this year, Dr. Mattera left Coherent well positioned to outperform its competitors. Now he's excited to kick off the next 20 years of his career. Please welcome Dr. Chuck Mattera.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'd like to say up front before I start my remarks, and before I say anything else, I don't have any jokes to tell. I don't have any forecasts. I don't have any financials. And I've heard somebody fondly describe me outside of the coffee break as no longer being incoherent. I want to wholeheartedly thank the incredible team at Coherent for the privilege of serving them for more than 20 years. I also want to thank Optica for 108 years running. Optica has been making a profound impact on our industry and on our world, from the recent Frontiers in Optics conference to this inaugural forum. Optica is inspiring engineers, scientists, executives, academics, researchers, and regulators to put the science of light to work for humanity. As you will hear this week, together we're solving not only the most fascinating problems of our time, we're also preparing the next generation to meet the challenges they'll face 25 to 50 years from now. Sustainable, long-term innovation takes vision. It takes patience and commitment. And most of all, it takes time. On this point, Einstein put it beautifully. It's not that I'm so smart, he said. It's just that I stay with problems longer. And that, in a few words, is what I came here to talk about, staying with problems longer. I know it sounds old school. After all, we are in the age of disruption. The AI race is on, and no one is standing still. Megatrends are transforming industries, and the planet's climate clock is ticking faster than ever. As the speed of change accelerates, taking the long view can feel like daydreaming. Investing in innovations that are a half a century away might feel like a fool's errand, but it's not. In fact, it's essential that we stay with problems longer. And I speak from experience. When I started my career in 1984, our industry was even more future-focused than it is today. If you were a forward-thinking scientist, you could find a place at one of the many great industrial research labs like AT&T Bell Laboratories, where the business model was designed to provide long-term funding for endeavors that wouldn't bear fruit for decades, if ever. Today, this way of thinking and working is increasingly called into question. Worldwide, our investments in the long-term R&D horizon seem to be growing short-sighted, at the very moment we should be doubling down on long-range innovation, be it for new materials, new lasers and optics, or the next generation of photonics. But no matter how fast our world changes, Einstein is still right. We need our smartest people to stay with problems longer. Some of the most important innovations now underway may not be ready for deployment until, say, 2050, and maybe even 2075. And that's exactly what should be expected for some part of what we're doing. let me share a few examples to illustrate my point. In 1983, the world's first cell phone had just hit the market. It was the size of a milk carton. It took 10 hours to charge. The battery lasted 30 minutes. Oh, and by the way, it cost $10,000. Back then, I was part of a team exploring the frontiers of semiconductor lasers. Looking back, it's satisfying to say that our work was well ahead of its time. But I can assure you that back then, feelings were mixed. Even back then, feelings were mixed. Of course, scientists found our work completely thrilling, but for the executives and investors, it was hard to see if, when, and how it would ever pay off. And yet today, your iPhone, our iPhones, run on lasers. To be fair, it isn't that executives in the 80s were asleep at the wheel. Back then, there was just nothing obvious about the long-term prospects of using lasers in a mobile device. Indeed, it's a textbook example of an age-old problem on how we think about innovation. In his Nobel lecture, the legendary Herb Kramer described the problem like this. Typically, he said, we value innovations based on how they improve existing technology. And too often, we discount the new capabilities that an innovation will unlock with future technology. Kramer learned this lesson the hard way. In 1963, he wrote a paper describing his idea for a radical invention, the double heterostructure laser. After Applied Physics Letters rejected it, eventually it was published in the Proceedings of IEEE, but it was largely ignored. Kramer then secured a patent that went mostly unused until finally it expired in 1985. Today, of course, we know that Kramer invented a core technology for modern semiconductor lasers. Now, the world that Kramer and his colleagues came up in had little use for this innovation, but ours would not be possible without it. In 1977, Professor Iga in Japan took Kramer's work even further with the design of a vertical cavity surface-emitting laser, or VCSEL. Again, here was an innovation that was decades ahead of its time. 12 years later, in 1989, my old friend and colleague, Jack Jewell, led a Bell Labs team that demonstrated it was possible to fabricate more than 1 million VCSELs on a 0.5 centimeter squared piece of gallium arsenide. It was a marvelous achievement, permanently redefining what was possible. Then in the mid-90s, our very own Julie Yang envisioned a world where datacom transceivers could harness the power of the VCSEL. For the very first time, she and her team at Finisar incorporated VCSELs into data center infrastructure. Back then, nobody could have expected ChatGPT to emerge, but now it has. And it's standing on the shoulders of Julie's work. That's about 30 years after Julie's breakthrough, 45 years after Professor Iga's invention, and more than a 0.5 century after Herb Kramer failed to get his paper published. Even for the most profound scientific advances, it really does take that long to change the world. Which means we have to ask ourselves, does the next Herb Kramer or Julie Yang have whatever they need to invent technology that won't be market ready for decades? Who's investing in their work right now? These questions are critical because even as the world moves faster, we need innovators to stay with problems longer. Another example of a long-range innovation that's only now proving to be a game changer is EUV lithography. The possibilities that EUV technology unlocks could easily be confused with magic. And it's entirely thanks to the patient, visionary investments that were made decade after decade. Looking ahead, I believe that perhaps the single most valuable problem that photonics can help solve is interestingly both long-term and urgent, and that is sustainable energy. In fact, you could argue that the AI energy crisis is urgent today because for too long we haven't had enough people or resources invested in long-range innovation. Consider that for a single query to ChatGPT draws enough electricity to power a light bulb for 20 minutes. Imagine what it means at scale. If you multiply it by the number of daily internet searches, you're talking about enough electricity to sustain millions of people. Earlier this year, the International Energy Agency warned that the amount of electricity consumed by AI and data storage could double by 2026. That's like adding another Japan to the world's power grid. And as urgent as our energy problems are today, they'll be even more serious tomorrow. This isn't just a technical challenge. It's an existential threat. And considering that photonics is at the core of the AI revolution, I believe that we have an opportunity and a responsibility to help solve it. For the first time in generations, the trillion-dollar question is changing. Instead of asking, how do we compute more data faster, the smarter question is, how do we consume less power during the computation? In other words, how do we rely less on electricity and more on light? What innovations are needed for us to take the leap from the century of the electron to the century of the photon? Well, even as we speak, our field's leading innovators, and to be clear, I'm talking about many of you, are bringing that future within reach. For example, an award-winning team at Coherent is making it possible to retrofit data centers replacing mechanical switches with optical switches. Basically, they're effectively switching a signal's path, moving packets of information with a fraction of the energy required by electrical switches. Similarly, lasers are making it possible to revolutionize data storage. Just as we did with CDs and DVDs, we can use light to encode data onto light-sensitive materials, except now we can do it at the nanoscale, and depending on how light travels through the materials, we can even think about adding a fourth or fifth dimension to data storage, opening up orders of magnitude more capacity using orders of magnitude less power. If any of this sounds unrealistic, just think of the ways we used to use light to overcome time and distance. A half a century ago, before I started at Bell Labs, the world's telecommunications systems were strung together with copper wire. Then we discovered how to increase bandwidth, sending more information farther and farther away by stitching together fiber optic cables undersea. Eventually, we made the technology scalable so that we could start building fiber optics right into our cities. Then we made it small enough to fit inside a data center, then onto a server rack, now onto a microchip. Next, many experts believe it's just a matter of time before photonics and electronics are fully integrated on the same chip. And then we're talking about a brave new world of wearables, hospital gowns with biometric sensors literally woven in, uniforms that allow soldiers, nurses, and emergency responders to share information instantly, hazmat suits that help factory workers stay safe even in the most dangerous working environments that millions of people on the planet work in. Our future may be unpredictable, but this much I know for sure. The most valuable innovations ahead of us, technologies that will dominate the next 50 years, will be the result of patient, visionary investing. And we need to ramp up those investments not tomorrow, but today. As the management consultant Peter Drucker once said, the best way to predict the future, to create the future, is to predict the future is to create it. That starts with dreaming bigger and with a larger cross-section in our ecosystem. Photonics is about so much more than producing ingredients for some other sector's technology. When we're at our best, we make the impossible possible. In countless ways, we can and we must continue to make our world safer, smarter, and more sustainable. No doubt, whoever creates the optics of the next generation of smartphones will be handsomely rewarded, but we have to ask ourselves, how long do we really expect to live in a world where we walk around with these devices? I'm sure that you saw from recent news of Meta about their advances using silicon carbide optics to enable AR glasses. Well, soon enough, a whole new generation of optics may dissolve the physical screen and embed small digital displays directly into our environment, allowing larger format displays to emerge with micro LEDs. Now, if we're serious about building that future today, we will need to get more comfortable with my favorite F word, failure. It's a fact of life. From physics to business to football, our greatest success typically comes after many spectacular failures. Scientists know this in our bones. Executives and investors spend unholy amounts of time and money trying to avoid it. But speaking as a scientist who just spent 20 years in a C-suite, let me assure you, our ability to create failures fast, to learn from them, and then overcome them is a powerful competitive advantage. Indeed, that's what I miss most about working at Bell Labs. As far as I can remember, the only directive we received from the top was to be brilliant. And it worked. Critical mass, diverse skills, interesting problems, deep resources drove Bell Labs to win 10 Nobel Prizes and 5 Turing Awards. Looking back, it was the only place in human history that could have invented transistors, lasers, solar cells, satellite communications, and even the foundations of modern AI. There are other examples of a modern-day renaissance in R&D investments in the US and in Europe. For example, this morning, we heard an inspirational overview of IMEC. Today, most business models do not provide the infrastructure or resources required to generate long-range breakthrough solutions. Instead, more and more of the resources we should be investing in long-range innovations are being spent on short-term goals. And that's not all bad. It's not bad at all. The good news is that organizations like Optica and strategic business forums like this one really can help academia, industry, and government move forward together. And to that end, I encourage all of us to own our expertise and our experiences. Our industry underpins and augments nearly every major growth industry on the planet. Communications, computing, imaging, sensing, navigation, cryptography, AI, quantum, and even the clean energy transition. Not only can we see a whole world of possibilities 25 to 50 years out, we also know what it takes to get there. In closing, I want to share a few words for anyone who hears this from overseas. Over the next 50 years, innovations will emerge from places that are not only in Europe or in the United States, or in the most developed economies in Asia. Very likely, they'll also come from places that few people can even think of as innovation hubs today, including in East Africa, Latin America, and other places across the global South. All to say, if you're coming up in this field and you don't see yourself yet represented in the ranks of leadership, please do not be discouraged. Do not settle for solving narrow technical problems. Rather, have the audacity to take on the greatest challenges of our time. Let someone else focus on increasing bandwidth or decreasing latency, all of which are important. But we don't need everybody focused on those. Instead, think about the innovations that will give energy-efficient access to every person on the planet for the internet. Now, conventional wisdom says that technology is neither good or bad, it's value neutral. But after 40 years of working on the cutting edge of photonics, alongside so many of you here, I'm proud to say that it hasn't been my experience at all. I believe that photonics is fundamentally bent on harnessing the power of light for the betterment of humanity. So, instead of doing what's realistic, show us what's possible. If you can stay with those problems longer, then I guarantee that the rewards will be worth everything you have to give. So be bold and know that we have your back. Thank you all for your leadership and contributions to this vital community. My money is on all of you, and I'm betting that the best is yet to come. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Chuck, for that wonderfully inspiring speech. I'll start us off with a couple questions, and then we'll open it to questions from the audience. Chuck, you joined the board of II-VI, I think, when they had $50 million in revenue, and you became an executive there when they were $150 million, and by the time you retired, Coherent was a $5 billion company. And you did that both organically and also through acquisitions, not all of which were understood at the time that you did them. Maybe can you just tell us a little bit more about how you think about acquisitions and growing a company?
Okay. Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you for your kindness. We took some very, very simple and basic steps to the process. We focused on the market. We understood that it's better to be a good company in a great market than it is to be a great company in a good market. Of course, my view is that Coherent is a great company in a great market. We took a long-term view about technology platforms and the ability that we would be able to drive them across multiple end markets. And we had the very disciplined approach to the financials with regard to returns on the investment. And we spent a lot of time thinking about the talent and how the talent and the culture would fit in. We surprised people. We did 25 acquisitions in the time I was there. We surprised people from time to time because they couldn't see how the pieces would ultimately fit together. And it was a challenge to be able to explain. But that strategy of both disruption and operating with some ambiguity and taking full advantage of the surprise, the element of surprise that we must in a public company. And it really ended up so far at this stopping point as an extraordinary platform. As I've said about the industry, I believe about the company, the best is yet to come.
Great. Thanks, Chuck. Very, very interesting. And now you've retired. So have you picked up any hobbies since you've retired? And do you want to give us any view of what's up for the next phase of your life?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll keep both of them short. I worked for 20 years at AT&T Bell Labs and the successors. I worked for 20 years at II-VI and Coherent. And I retired from Coherent, but I'm dreaming about my third and final 20-year act. And I'm focused on those aspects of resiliency for the planet that will allow us to remain or get even safer and smarter and more sustainable. So I'm focused on that. The energy transition is among them. But as far as my hobbies, I really never had any, but I have one now. And if you make a quad chart with performance on the y-axis and fun on the x-axis, I'm in the lower right-hand corner of the quad chart as it relates to my passion for playing rhythm guitar for blues music. That's what I'm interested in. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Chuck. All right, any questions from the audience? And if so, raise your hand and please identify yourself.
Chuck, thanks for that great talk. I'm David Hagan, one of the few academics in the audience from Creole, the College of Optics and Photonics. So thanks for the nod to long-term research. We've been in that business for a long time. I'd also just like to maybe make the comment that serendipity has got a lot to do with it as well. And just take Jack Joule's example. He wasn't trying to make VCSELs. He was trying to make optical logic elements. And he put a lot of work into that, and it paid off in a completely different way. So thanks for the nod to long-term research. We're still doing that in universities, but hopefully companies can find some way to invest in that as well.
Thank you, Dean Hagen. Yep, thank you.
And just as a follow-on also, Chuck, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you balance like the long-term view with sort of the short-term, all the pressures that you get from investors, the board, et cetera.
I think it all starts with setting the values for the company in a strategic direction and being sure that the culture has a centripetal force to it. And that's what we were able to create, is this force to the center about a purpose that we had that was much bigger than any of us. And we have to balance. We're a public company. We have to say what we're going to do and do what we say. But the reality is that the time goes by fast. It's 40 years and I'm here. If we didn't have a view and didn't have people that could see out to the horizon and maybe even beyond the horizon, we would never be ready. And every business case that we ever did was wrong, because all forecasts are wrong. We either arrived too early or we arrived too late, but in any case, we had to make adjustments so that we could win. And it was all about balancing the short term and the long term with the talent that we have and their aspirations to change the world. Okay?
Hey, Andrew Ace, IDEX Optical Technologies. So you said you went through, 25 acquisitions over the course of your career there. I forget the statistics exactly, but I believe something like 60% or more acquisitions fail from a perspective of financial results and other things. So what do you think was some of your guiding principles and success in guiding the acquisition strategy that you had, and then also what were some of the biggest lessons learned?
We have a discipline, we have a process, we have a discipline, we stick to it. Some of the best deals that we did were the deals that we didn't do as a result of that process. Our board guided the management team at every step, so we had a view from the outside, if you will. I think you have to stick to the discipline, and the amount of due diligence and the amount of time that we spent with management teams before we acquired a company. We're really acquiring a set of colleagues, a set of collaborators, and people that we need to have a foundation of trust with from the day that we get started. We put a lot of effort into it in addition to the financials, and everybody knew from the moment that they came in on day one, they belonged.
Chuck, thank you very much for your Bell Lab stories. I, too, started at AT&T in 1984, so some good memories, 4 ESS, 5 ESS, DAX, all that stuff. But, so you've gone through a lot of acquisitions. You encouraged everyone in this room to focus on the long term, stay with it longer, be patient. Yet the financial community today is not very kind, right? You hit your numbers every quarter, you keep growing, you bid or whatever it may be. How did you balance your customer set, which these days is the hyperscalers and not so much the service providers, because that market has slowed down a bit. How did you balance your long-term investment with a group of very large customers who are relatively risk-averse?
Let me clarify. I'm imploring a focus on the long term, but I'm not suggesting to ignore the business realities. That has to be taken care of. It has to. That's table stakes. That only gets you so far. And you wake up and you find out. You either have the wrong platform, you don't have what you need. I'm suggesting to take that long-term view and sustain that long-term view as a way to sustain the platform that we're in. There's no way around it. we were focused, the company is focused on sustainably growing. But if you're only looking out 1 or 2 or 3 years, we do a 5-year plan and even a 10-year plan, it's not enough. You need to have some people who are encouraged and have the skill set and the passion for looking well beyond that, because in the meanwhile, you can take your eye off the ball and miss it. As far as the large customers go, I mean, we have enjoyed a tremendous experience with that. And the largest customers, the largest blue chip customers in every one of these industries, I don't think, at least I can say for me and for the company culture, we wouldn't trade any of them away.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I think we're out of time, right, Jose? Okay, thanks again. Thanks, Chuck.